There is a very strange, twisted, and bizarre phenomenon when it comes to our belief in Mashiach. And that is that the thought of Mashiach, the thought that one day, very soon, Golus is actually going to end, the Mashiach is actually going to arrive and usher in a new era of redemption and Geula, leaves a lot of people with feelings of apprehension and fear. And there's a lot of concern, worry, and unease in people's hearts. People have all kinds of misgivings about what their future lives are actually going to look like once Mashiach arrives. And people are afraid that their day-to-day routine or day-to-day quality of life will be destroyed once Mashiach arrives. People are afraid that their marriages will be ruined once Mashiach comes. People are afraid that their personality and their individuality is going to be squashed and stunted once Mashiach comes. Some people are afraid that everything they live for and everything they care about in life won't matter then or won't be socially acceptable then, and et cetera, all these different kinds of fears. And what people don't realize is that these questions and these concerns are themselves a direct result of the dark and bitter exile, the toxic and perverse exile that we currently find ourselves in. And that this thought process and this way of thinking is analogous to the thinking of an addict who is terrified of becoming separated from his addictive substances. And basically, all of us, every one of us who still finds themselves in the Golus reality and the Golus mentality, is addicted to the drug called Golus. And we are addicted to the darkness of exile. We are addicted to the toxicity and unhealthiness of exile. We are addicted to the idea of ego and all the many forms of selfishness and self-absorption, and to spiritual stagnation and spiritual complacency. We are addicted to the disgusting, unhealthy sense of self, to the gross feeling of I. And this addiction of Golus is no different than any other addiction to any other addictive substance, whether that's the very widespread, commonplace addictions in our society that are only moderately harmful, like phone addiction, internet addiction, or addiction to sugar or cigarettes, or whether it's the more severe, destructive, debilitating addictions, like that actually and literally destroy relationships and destroy lives, like alcohol and drugs and pornography and severe eating disorders, etc. And the common denominator between all of these addictive substances, and the common denominator between all the myriad of addictive substances and unhealthy behavioral patterns that are out there, is that they all slowly ruin and destroy and erode our lives in some way or another over time. And they numb us and they rob us of our quality of life. And yet, once we get used to them, once we become dependent on them, we grow this unhealthy attachment to them. And we have a very, very difficult time, and often an impossible time, getting rid of them and cutting them out of our lives. And with time, and eventually, we even stop being able to envision a future free of this issue. And many, many people, actually, at a certain point, eventually stop even viewing it as something problematic or negative or as an issue, which is just a sign of just how addicted they are. And yet, the outside objective observer, to them, it's so clear and so obvious how bad and negative this thing is, what a harmful and unhealthy effect it's having on another person, how it's literally ruining their lives, and how healthy that person would be if they would just be able to free themselves of this thing which is controlling them and enslaving them. And one of the reasons why it's so hard to break free, one of the reasons why it's so hard to cut things out of our life and change, and why it's so easy to just continue doing whatever it is that we're doing, is because in the short term, it's harder to change. It's more difficult and uncomfortable to change, because that would result in strong, intense withdrawal symptoms that are very, very unpleasant and very uncomfortable. And in the very, very short term, one usually feels much, much worse when they quit. But that is actually just the system freeing itself of all the unhealthiness and curing itself and healing itself from all the imbalance. And it obviously depends on the specific issue, but if one just is strong and holds on and pushes through and stays clean for a little bit, for a couple of days, for a week, for a few weeks, for a month, for a couple of months, for a year, there is a literal shift in the brain at one point, and there's a shift in one's perception. And at that point, one's quality of life, one's overall quality of life rises tremendously and becomes much, much better. And basically, and just one very common silly example is take the internet, for example. If you would quit the internet and all electronic devices for 2 weeks, your quality of life, your overall quality of life would shoot through the roof, your focus would shoot through the roof, and you would just become a happier, more present person. and a happier, more present version of yourself. And now, bringing this back to the full circle, is imagine how bizarre it would be and how twisted it would be for a drug addict to say something like, I'm afraid that my marriage would be ruined if I managed to overcome my drug addiction. Or imagine how bizarre it would be for a porn addict to say something like, I want to make sure to get married before I overcome my addiction, because if I got married afterwards, then my marriage wouldn't be as good. Now that would obviously be ridiculous and ludicrous and insane. And anyone who's afraid of Golus coming to an end, anyone who's afraid of Mashiach's arrival and the Mashiach's arrival is going to ruin their life, is being equally ridiculous, if not more so. And anyone who thinks that Mashiach's arrival is going to ruin their marriage, that is like a porn addict who's afraid that them overcoming their addiction is going to ruin their marriage. Anyone who's afraid that Mashiach's arrival is going to ruin the relationship they have with their children is as insane as somebody, as a drug addict, being afraid that them overcoming their addiction is going to ruin the relationship they have with their children. Anyone who's afraid that Mashiach's arrival is going to squash their personality and ruin their quality of life. It's like someone who's afraid that quitting the internet and getting rid of their smartphone is going to ruin and destroy their quality of life. Nothing could be further from the truth, and the complete opposite holds true. And it's only because the intense and bitter darkness of exile distorts our perception and distorts our reality that we're even capable of holding such twisted backwards beliefs. And just to leave you with one more thought, is that the darkness of exile is the source of every single addictive substance that is out there, every single unhealthy behavior and behavioral pattern that's out there, that's known to man, every single last one of them. And therefore, picture the dramatic shift that takes place, the difference between someone who's addicted to drugs and how they look once they overcame that addiction. Now, picture that dramatic shift times 10, times 100, times 1,000, times 1,000,000, times 1,000,000,000. And that is how dramatic the shift is going to be between the time of Golus and the time of Geula, the time of exile and the time of Mashiach. Because when Mashiach comes, we aren't just going to be freed from one form of darkness, one addictive substance, one unhealthy behavior. We are going to be freed from Golus itself. We are going to be freed from the mother of all unhealthiness, from the source of all darkness. And therefore, when Mashiach comes, we are going to be living these amazing, powerful, rich lives. Every single day is going to be rich and powerful and meaningful and deep and stimulating. And we are going to be our true selves and our best selves and the people we truly are and the people we're always meant to be, not this distorted Golus version of ourselves, this stunted version of ourselves. And basically the lowest low in the times of Geula is going to be higher than the highest high that we experience now during Golus. And once Mashiach comes, we're going to look back at ourselves and we're going to laugh. And we're going to laugh at all the fears and apprehensions we had. And we're going to ask ourselves then, how in the world could we have been so stupid? And the bottom line is, there's nothing to be afraid of when it comes to Mashiach. We don't have to be afraid of Mashiach. We don't have to be afraid of growing up. Mashiach is just pure goodness. It is pure goodness and pure sweetness, and it is pure healthiness in its best form, the ultimate form. So there's nothing to be afraid of. Let's get excited for it. Let's embrace it. And the Mashiach now, let's bring Mashiach together.